Patrick, as I pull up the DXY, you want to walk us through some of that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand once again that the DXY is a relative value measure for the dollar in relation to other currencies around the world. And some of the biggest currencies that it's weighted against right now is the yen and the euro. So when you look at the dollar going down, we were just at $115 this summer. Now we're down to 105 last week. And you saw as the Fed spoke, we just see this rapid decline from 105s down to 102, even to 101. We hit into the 101 range. So to me, that is showing here two things. One, it's occurring globally, and the impacts of the global financial markets do hit us back home. Because what you end up seeing is when the Fed is talking about this garbage here, and he's releasing, I'm going to have a 0.25% interest rate, the banks are safe or they're not safe, we're not really sure what's going on. What he is projecting is uncertainty. The market doesn't like uncertainty. So you're seeing the entire market react. And then on the other side of the globe, when you wake up, they've already reacted to it, further driving down the DXY and causing more instability across the entire global market. It's like a pendulum swinging back and forth. But every time it goes back the other way, someone like another person pushes it and it just keeps getting much more violent. Eventually, this is going to break. And I guess we're seeing that this is really truly causing us better like defense mechanisms when we have gold, silver, and Bitcoin, because you see the impacts of that on those values.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary of where we're at with that, and we've got a few other stories as we turn the page towards world events, and we have banking issues over there as well. So as I start talking about that, we will get to precious metals as Patrick did mention there, but there's a lot going on overseas, and I'm looking for the right window as always. But Dylan, while I find that, any comments on the dollar?
Yeah. It includes the dollar, but I want to take a step back and point out a pattern that you should recognize. And when you start seeing this pattern, immediately red flags go off. And it's when everything is fine, yet then there becomes limits on withdrawals of your funds from custodians, things like that. Where there's more controls put in place, so it becomes more difficult or more hoops to jump through. This happened in the crypto space. One example was Voyager. When Voyager collapsed, everything was fine, but then all of a sudden you could only withdraw like $10,000 a day, which may sound like a lot to the average person, but if you have $1 million on Voyager, right, that you need to get off there, because now you can't just withdraw $1 million. Now they just tell you that you can only withdraw 10,000, right? That creates a real problem. That creates a constraint for you. And you're like, how much money can I get out before the inevitable happens? And I can't get access to any of my money or any of my capital. And so this same scenario, Voyager ended up collapsing and people weren't able to get all their money out, even though they were trying. So once those things start happening and being put in place, it can spiral downwards pretty quickly because then people start to notice, hey, why can't I take my funds out? Why can't I get access to these? Why are there these new rules there? So they start to pressure more, ask more questions. They start to try and withdraw more. And then the controls get clamped down. And then eventually they're like, hey, we have to pause withdrawals for the well-being of the bank or the well-being of whatever institution or fund that you're a part of. And at that point in time, like, you now have no access to your funds. And then it gets tied up in court or bankruptcy or whatnot, something beyond your control, and you're taking a haircut or you're not getting it back. Or if you do, it's years down the line. The same type of pattern is playing out in all these different spaces in some form or another, or some scales larger than others. So just something to pay attention to when you see those things, especially as it pertains to your own individual life.
Yeah, the financial system works just fine as long as there's confidence in the system. When confidence goes away, there are runs on banks and banks close. And then people like Yellen and Powell have to step in and do some PR and say, everything's fine. Don't worry about your funds, even though that may not be true. And it's not just limited to the United States. As we've talked last week, we talked about Credit Suisse, and we talked about how that's over in Europe, and how that's UBS, a major merger over there. They spent a ton of funds over that. It originally was talked only about like 3.7 or 7.8 billion, which is still a large number. But Switzerland had to pledge over $170 billion worth just to keep Credit Suisse from collapsing, taking down one of the largest financial systems in the world with Swiss Bank. Everybody's heard that term before. That could have imploded. And even in the midst of all these bank issues, not only is the United States raising interest rates, so is the Bank of England. They did it as well. They raised 0.25%. So but the banking contagion is just borderline, just almost at that tipping point already. But as we talk about different currencies, the one world conversation we need to talk about, not many people were talking about. I think I saw it on Tucker Carlson the other night, but he did talk about the stories that we're not talking about. And he did a great job of leading into the story. But there's that. Is there a new world order or a new world currency coming? And is it, we need to talk about the meeting between the leader of Russia and the leader of China and what they spoke about. And Patrick, I know that we talked about this. Dylan, I'm not sure if you've seen the video from Xi and Putin. Have you seen that yet?
No, I'm excited to see it.
All right. Well, Patrick, I don't know if I have the clip. I don't know if I can share it, but I can certainly share the tweet to it. Patrick, why don't you give a little bit of color to this to catch Dylan up here and our audience?
Okay, so what has been occurring, and Joe Brown talks about this a lot on Heresy, is the de-dollarization, right? So I could step back and cover this from multiple angles. Fundamentally and foundationally for me, as someone who is like a Bible reading believer, I see that it talks about one world currencies coming. So to me, this doesn't exactly surprise me. But what is surprising is that I'm actually getting to watch it play out in front of my eyes. Because what you're seeing here is now China and Russia are making deals to trade in the yen backed by gold and in the ruble backed by gold. Russia is just like really happy to trade with everyone. And what they're saying to the US is, we don't care about your sanctions. It doesn't affect us because we have found a new road, a new yellow bricks road to trade on.
Yes, the Belt and Road Initiative, which I know Andy Schechtman's talked about that. I've talked to him about that before. A number of people, it's the trade routes. Ray Dalio spoke about that in his great book about how I think it's called New World Order. Is that right, Dylan?
The New World Order? Sounds familiar.
It was Ray Dalio's book, but anyway, he talked about like one of the 8 components of the leading economies and how trade routes are one of them. Mm-hmm. And now China, with working with Russia and Putin, we've talked about this I know I talked about this went and looked up. I've done BRICS videos on my other channel on Litecoin Leader for at least 7 months, and like Russia, like the typical response to a country that's not playing nicely with the United States is they put sanctions on them, and that limits them or removes them for access to the SWIFT system, which is how other countries often trade currency back and forth. But it's really just a messaging system. It's not. There are ways around it, and there are more and more ways around it every year. And now, like Russia and China are now like the largest supplier of oil to China is now Russia, not anyone else. They're also one of the biggest trading partners. They're working with the ruble, which is backed by gold, and forget the petrodollar, but they're now dealing with the yuan, which is tied to the ruble.
Yuan. I said the yen, yeah. The yuan.
Yeah, close enough. It was on the screen. You're good enough. So. But we'll talk about yen another time. But with all these countries, now they're in the same clip that I shared on the Twitter clip, which will be in the links for the show down below. But they're already talking about how this is going to spread to the other BRICS nations and be part of Latin America and Asia and South America, like basically half the world and over half of the population. So everyone's running away from the dollar, and they're running towards an alternative currency. Hopefully one that's more stable, and a gold-backed currency like the ruble tied to the yuan seems like a good answer.
I mean, I'd rather use the ruble than the dollar at this point.
Yes, I would tend to agree, which is a very peculiar statement for some people.
I can't believe I just said that, but that's
exactly
the truth. I mean, as we all think about it, we're all going, "Oh crap, I can't disagree with him on the air." That's not looking great, but it is the truth. But we'd rather all use gold, right? I mean, that's what we're saying here is gold is what we'd rather use. And the average American still has this misconception. It is a myth that the dollar is backed by gold. It is backed by nothing.
Well, once upon a time it was, and we will talk about that in one of our later segments on the history that people need to know about what happened about 60 years ago, where we were talking about going off the gold standard. Had not done that. That happened in 71, but certain events happened in 1963 that we'll talk about a little bit later. But yes, going back to a money-based system instead of a currency-based system that's based on fiat belief in the government, that's a problem. And most people, they have never experienced it because it's been over 50 years since we had a global gold reserve currency. We don't have that anymore. So